You all good, Tom? Good evening. Welcome to the May 10th Village Board Work Session. This meeting is called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Well, we do have a lot of legal items to review tonight with Corporation Counsel. But before we get into that, I know the trustees and I have some announcements, but I'll kick off to just give a little preview of our first item of the agenda is the first public report from the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee. And I'm very pleased that that committee has already since 2 weeks ago when it's been formed, it's already met twice, and it has elected its co-chairs who will be speaking with us in just a few minutes. Congratulations and thank you very much for serving on the committee, and to everyone on the committee. It's a really vibrant group of motivated people. Take out your calendars. We have put on my documentary discussion screening hat next Thursday at 6:30. Join us in the library. As always, it's free, and this screening is called The Hunting Ground. It's about sexual assault on college campuses. It's a pretty heavy and difficult subject for a lot of folks. So I'm pleased that we have an excellent panel that's able to help us understand not just the circumstance, but how we can address it in our own lives and our own communities, and learn more about what's actually going on. Again, that's 6:30 at the Ossining Public Library, and as always, it is free. And I'm delighted to be part of this group of volunteers that brings this series to the community every month, so we can discuss things that matter, and this certainly is on that list of things that matter. My colleagues on the board have any information?
So this Saturday, May 13th, is a second Saturday, and that means it's time for Ossining Second Saturday Jazz at the Elks Lodge, and at 7:30 we've got Paul Connor's Organ Trio. It should be a lot of fun. I haven't actually seen the band, but I have heard some recordings and some live recordings, and I think they're going to be great and a lot of fun. The lodge provides, they have a liquor license, and they also do some bar snacks, so they'll provide that. So that's Saturday at 7:30 at the Elks Lodge, the Paul Connor's Organ Trio, the fifth in the series of Ossining Second Saturday Jazz. Thanks.
Deputy Mayor, I heard that Ossining is now developing a reputation as the jazz capital.
Well, I'm not sure I can completely take responsibility for that, but I'm certainly pleased that. Well, sure, why not? But I'm certainly pleased that anytime we can raise up jazz music and here in Ossining, that's a beautiful thing. And I think, and I guess I'll just mention that the lodge voted to allow me to book all the second Saturdays beginning in October through June of next year, so the series will continue. And I've already talked to some of the bands that were favorites from the past 5 months, and we're going to have some new folks as well, because we've got 9 shows to put together. So I'm really excited about it. I'm glad we've got regular live music in Ossining.
Yes, and I've heard about some of the terrific artists you have coming up. I look forward to attending some of those myself, and thank you very much for being such a big part of the revitalization of jazz in Ossining. It's a big deal.
Thank you.
Trustee Quesada, did you have a comment?
Yes. So next week, next Wednesday, before our regular meeting down in the courthouse, we have, I don't want to say a special meeting, I guess, a special gathering, I want to call it. It is going to be in Nelson City Park. It's going to start at 6 o'clock. And it is more of a meeting where we have a little bit of a combination of the school superintendent part, and I'm not sure if the principal of Park School may be there as well, but there's a proposal of where Park School would like to utilize or use Nelson City Park as during the days, during the school hours, as part of that. So there's a proposal that I would like to bring into the community, in the neighborhood, and see what the feedback is, and we can go from there. So it's next Wednesday, May 17 at 6 o'clock. There's some refreshments be available, so please join us. The neighbors and definitely Austin residents that use that park during the day, I think it should be very exciting. Just I think the collaboration between the school board, I want to say the school, and the village board. It should be an interesting meeting. So please join us at 6 o'clock Wednesday, May 17th.
Trustee Quesada, forgive me, I actually don't know the answer to this question, so I'm not just prompting you, but it's intended to be at Nelson Sitting Park. Do we have a rain location?
We can go to my house if it rains. Not too far.
Please, please.
Uh,
Okay, so we'll figure that
But
out.
we'll figure that.
Okay.
If it rains, we'll figure something.
Okay.
Yes.
Sorry for putting you on the spot. Anybody else?
I do. I got the email. I was just looking it up. So I was asked to read it. Hold on. And if I put my glasses on, even better. Okay, so I received an email. Everyone is invited on Saturday, busy day, May 13th, Nelson Park, 4 p.m. We will gather together at the 1-year anniversary of the passing of our beloved, let me just get this, Phil Ishmael. And, you know, they don't have a rain date yet because I guess the weather's supposed to be bad, but they just want to let everybody know 4 p.m. It's about 30 to 45 minutes, informal, but please come, bring your friends, for all of you that have been touched by his life.
Thanks. Do you want to join the party or not this week?
No, not this week.
Okay. Well, friendly.
Thank you, Mayor and Board. Our first agenda item tonight is an update on the newly formed Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee. With us this evening,
I'm not sure what you said.
I heard you loud and clear.
And everybody silenced their phones.
that was funny. I needed that. With us this evening tonight, we have Justine Lackey and Kaya Gam, and a gentleman to be introduced, I would imagine, to do a presentation on what's transpired since the formation of this committee not 2 weeks ago. So with that, I'd like to welcome you all to the microphone for your presentation.
And I'll just introduce you so you don't just have to introduce yourself. This is Jeff Gasparo. He's one of the co-chairs that the committee elected last night along with Justine Lackey. Welcome.
Good evening.
Hi.
Hello.
So we've met twice since we were
Can you
appointed.
kindly
Come a little
come to the
closer. Our committee's met twice since we were appointed, and I don't have a whole lot substantively to report, but I can report that we are getting organized. We had our election last night, and Justine and I were appointed co-chairs. Last night we had our first sort of brainstorming, visioning session as to what the members, who are very diverse and represent a lot of different aspects of the community. So we had a visioning session about what people, what was sort of their vision for the downtown, and that led into a process where we drafted a mission statement. So I have a draft of a mission statement. We're still tweaking it a little bit, and you know, if the village board would like to hear our draft, I'd be happy to share it with the caveat that it's a draft, but I'm pretty sure that it's pretty close to final. I don't. Do you want to add anything, or
No, I mean, I think.
would you like to hear the
I do.
draft? Okay. So the Downtown Redevelopment Working Committee, which we use the acronym DRWC, has been appointed by the Village Board of Trustees. And as a group, we stand for the continued revitalization of downtown. Our mission is to act as a think tank and a liaison between the Village Board of Trustees, business owners, and Ossining residents. By the end of our 90-day tenure, we will deliver to the Village Board of Trustees an actionable plan and framework for continued development of downtown, as well as our recommendations for an implementation timeline. We will accomplish this by researching and exploring a variety of topics we believe will lead to the accelerated, intelligent, and continued growth of our downtown. We will begin our process by looking to the existing resources available to us, including past studies on hand and the Village Comprehensive Plan. Topics of exploration include the development of public space and downtown parcels, economic and business development, transportation and parking, integration of waterfront, downtown, Upper Croton corridor, and the preservation of existing communities and businesses. We are guided by our collective principles, which include sustainability, inclusivity, and creating an inviting, innovative, aesthetic-pleasing community for all. So that's our draft mission statement. you want to comment on where we're at?
I think it's always interesting when you get 20 people in a room and try to get something done. And
We
to that,
sympathize.
I am sure you do. But I think everybody in that room is aware of that, so we have a lot to accomplish in 90 days. And I think really just keeping the continuity of the meetings and keeping organized and keeping the mission at hand. Hopefully we'll have something really great to deliver to you guys at the end of when we wrap it up. So
I had a question I may have misunderstood it. So definition of the downtown, what is the downtown? Is that
so
defined
that's
in the
actually
mission
defined
or
in the
not?
comprehensive plan, which we were just talking about.
Okay.
So that's where I would look to that.
Okay,
I think it's actually in the plan itself. So I think, do you want to talk about
because you went to the upper corridor in the mission statement, so.
Well, we had some discussion about sort of the scope of our
Okay.
group, but the comprehensive plan does define downtown from 9 to, I believe, State Street, and then
Right.
Broadway to Broad Avenue. So,
Okay,
Yeah, I
All
think so. That is, this is something that Jeff and I were talking about because when we had this initial meeting at the library, that meeting was specifically about a downtown working committee. I think part of the general group's concerns is as we look to what we think the downtown is, we have to think long term and think about how, Upper Croton Avenue and with the Bethany Arts Center coming in. Not that it's going to be part of our recommendation, but hey, let's not forget this part.
thank you.
Any other questions?
No, I'll just let the public know that you talk about the fact that there are 20 people on the committee. 15 of them are residents who were appointed 2 weeks ago, and then the 5 of us who represent the village are myself and Quantel for the village board, Corporation Counsel Kahan, Director of Planning Lynn Brooks Avni, and from the Planning Board John Fry, who was with us during the comprehensive plan process, and so has a lot of institutional knowledge to bring to the table. Justine, you are a local business owner.
I
You
am.
own a second floor business right on Main Street.
It's actually on the first floor. It's behind the restaurant, between the restaurant and Doka's.
Got it, got it.
It's on 25 Main.
And Jeff, you are an attorney, and some of your experience or your training was at Pace Land Use Law Center, where you can you give us like a 10-second explanation of what that is?
well, my personal work at the Land Use Law Center dealt with affordable housing, but affordable housing includes a lot of sort of very broad policy areas, zoning, land use, mixed use development, things like that. So that's sort of my relationship with the Land Use Law Center. And also when I was in law school, I had a good relationship with John Nolan, who was the founder of the Land Use Law Center. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, no, I just wanted folks to know I'm really pleased with that the committee selected people with different experiences and perspectives, and that's reflective of everyone who's on the committee. And it's there's no way to in 20 people represent every interest and experience in the village, but we've got a pretty good cross section. And so I know that the two of you are approaching this with as objective a mindset as possible, because it is a lot of voices to take in and then to keep on task and reflect back to us. So thanks for taking that on. And by the way, neither Quantel nor I were at the meeting last night. And
Right.
so we learned about this. I got a text after 10 o'clock last night with somebody who told me who the selection had been. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Manager Fairley, I think you wanted to, Interim Manager Fairley, I think you wanted to introduce a little something into the agenda that's not here right now.
Sure, it is downtown related, and I appreciate that, Mayor. Before we turn it over to the Corporation Council show, we have
Must see TV.
yeah. As I believe most of the public is aware, and I know the board is aware, we have partnered with the other committee working on the Downtown Development Committee, with some work on the heels of the allocation that they discussed with the Board of Trustees some months ago with regard to some of the tree well and street tree improvement details. That's been furthered along with the retention of Omar in his efforts with the Downtown Development Committee. And in a nutshell, he went out, put out an RFP for some LED street lighting details, which is now fully installed. To supplement that work, DPW crews went out, namely Kenny Garrett. I'd really be remiss if I didn't mention his name. He went out and put power sources on every single pole so we can eliminate what was going to exist, which was basically daisy chain extension cords, because we didn't have power at every location. So he went out and did that as part of his day-to-day, and I appreciate that. So those are all installed now, and they will run off the most efficient way they can, which is off the photo cells off of the heads of the lights. And I believe an announcement following the formal lighting and execution of that work is due out soon, and I think it's going to be on May 24th, I believe. It's a Thursday, but there'll be details to follow. And if anybody wants
it's
to,
either gonna be, it's either the 25th, it's either the Friday the 26th. I know there were emails back and forth.
Okay,
I
yeah.
didn't announce because I didn't want to confuse
Yeah.
anybody. The end of the week of the
yeah,
either
right before the
25th or 26th. Yeah.
they're hoping to have them lit permanently at night before Memorial Day weekend, and that'll be nice to have as a nice summer detail down there. And most of the lights downtown, the decorative ones and the overhead lights, are already converted to LED, so that'll be a nice complement to those lighting details down there. Now, the reason I'm mentioning it here is because it has a second part to it. It also had the tree wells for all of the decorative trees in the downtown area were also identified as in need of restoration and improvements. And that wasn't defined as clearly as the LED lights were. So that's another project that the DPW guys took on, and I appreciate that. And you'll see them down there now actually working. They're ripping up the street, and they're making everything true and level, and they're putting concrete and the cobble details back into the tree wells to make sure everything is nice and smooth and trip-free. The reason they're doing that is because it's to get ready for the installation of a to-be-determined wrought iron detail. Now, the way we went about that was initially in the RFP, the Downtown Development Committee envisioned going out, buying something, and maybe the DPW crews would install it. But what it grew into was we went to a local vendor, which many of you may not know, but we have a very accomplished iron artisan on Central Avenue. And we solicited his expertise, and he came up with two details that the Downtown Development Committee is going to consider. But Omar was holding off on bringing that forth to them until I spoke to you about the main reason I'm here, which is it has exceeded the financial scope of the work.
Oh.
The LED lighting has, I'll give you some exact details for the LED lighting. The LED lighting has originally projected at around $15,000. When we finally started going down and installing the lights on all the trees, we wanted to make everything symmetrical and contiguous, and we went all the way down the Broad. We jumped to the other side of the post office to the tune of an additional $6,000, which is to be determined where that's going to come from. And the tree well details are a significant cost, and I'm really not sure. I have to still get with Omar to figure out what the best way to approach that is. But the estimated cost per tree well is $650. Now, if we go if we go one at a time, you know, it's manageable within our operating budget if we do, say, 20 of them. If we do all of them this summer, which could be in excess of 55 to 60 tree wells, we could approach $30,000 to $40,000, which is something that I think Omar and Tom Warren and I need to talk about. But I will tell you, even at those levels, and because we are at this point in the operating budget year, and we've closed out the winter season, if you will, I'm confident that if we decided not to do a draw from the Downtown Development Committee fund, we could absorb that cost in the operating budget of Public Works. I will tell you that the detail really is part and parcel with the work that the guys are doing now, which is basically labor and then some materials for the concrete and what have you. But that's what I want you to consider tonight. Possible additional transfer of the money that you already allotted for this project of between $20,000 and $30,000.
So what was the original expectation for tree wells? What was that estimate?
I think, again, I want to qualify it because the scope really wasn't defined for the tree well restoration per se, but I think the original ask was for $25,000 for the lighting and the tree wells.
Oh, for both?
No.
Uh,
I think they were separate projects. I don't know what the dollar amount was
Well,
associated, but
well, they went out as one RFP and they really weren't. I think they were presented together and the ask was presented together. Dollar amount, I believe, was $25,000 total that we said could be the downtown development transfer. But
no, because it was 90 some. It was like 96,000 for four
It was
things. Those
97,
were the two
yeah.
big ones. Yeah.
It was $97,000, including Omar's fees, which is not that much.
Yeah.
So you bring it down maybe to 90, it's like 5, so it's like 92,000 or something. Mostly for these two projects. I feel like you like 25 or so was per project. I got everything you said, and they wrote all that, they sent me pictures and all that, but
Yeah.
nobody told me we were over budget in all these emails, so I didn't realize that. I think we just need to figure out the number. So what are you asking for? An additional?
well, I'm comfortable going over the
Mhm.
budget with what we have in the operating budget or in the fund.
Okay.
I just really want to get a feel for.
Let's figure it out first. To me, let's go back to, I guess, the minutes that we took and the money that was allocated for each project. I would like to see that. And I would like to understand when the RFP went out for this particular project, what was the amount? And because we knew the scope of the work. That was defined. That, to me, my understanding was, just going to say 45 tree wells, that's what it was. If that was the budget, so to speak, we had $25,000 as a budget. When the RFP went out, to me would have been like either whoever was handling that part in this particular case, you said it was Omar who saw that, and if he realized that was over budget already, to me it would have been appropriate for him to come and tell us, look, we over budgeted this particular project. How do you guys feel about this? Because that's when we actually see where the money is going to be allocated. So I would like to understand where the money is going. So
Well, he
that's
Well,
just-
I just want to, I just want to amend that a bit. They put numbers together, and
Which is the budget.
on which is the budget that they guesstimated at. They're not just, originally it was the lights, which they came in pretty much, they expanded, because once you start a project, as we all know, they found a tree here, a tree there, they added a few. That's not the big deal. The ironworks, when they showed me, at least in pictures, they're also cleaning up the entire area. They budgeted for like, what would it called, he estimated that, the iron, and you could use plastic, you could use different fabrications, which are cheaper. But once they looked at it, they then decided to clean. Did they also start cleaning up? I mean, I have pictures of it. I don't think Tom can capture them, but they're actually cleaning up because there have been complaints about how the bricks
Yeah,
are covered
well,
up.
that's
They're
our
really
guys.
doing more than just like, here's the fabrication. You're putting a little square around a tree.
I'm
They're
not
moving
questioning.
forward.
I'm not questioning now. What I'm saying is, if we had a budget, regardless of what the money was, it should have been, to me, appropriate for when the RP came back and realized that there was over budget in that particular. I'm talking about just the LED lights. We need to understand what that money is.
That really,
So,
if I may, that really wasn't when the RFP came in. I think what he did was he put out an RFP with an anticipated cost of $14,000. The fella he ended up selecting had a proposal for 15 and change,
Right.
which was close enough to the
Close
RFP.
enough, yeah.
And he also really based it on his experience because he did a lot of work in Yonkers. He did a lot of work in, I want to guess, New Rochelle, but he did 2 bigger cities, and we saw actual details of what he did. So for the anticipated extra $1,000 was, I think,
which is fine. That
when
I
we
get.
added the extra trees, that was partly me. We were trying to balance out because we were originally not going to do the trees down in and around the roundabout, but to have that continuity, and once the roundabout was put on the shelf for now, we did those trees. So that's where the majority of the excess trees came from, was there, and then across the street at the post office, which was also going to be impacted by the roundabout, but no longer. So, I included those, and and that's where we use that same unit price, and that's how we have the extra money, basically.
So let me just, I do think it's important that we understand exactly what was approved to this point for this project, because it was 97,000 total. And, you know, this much of it was those cards. Some of it was a communications campaign. There's the litter campaign.
Which they're still
but those are
working
more
on, yeah.
soft costs. And then the two hard costs were the LED lights and this. So to get up to that 97,000, this original had to be something around 25,000, and we need to know what that number is. But as far as, you know, this to me sounds a lot nicer than what we were originally even conceiving, and a really long-term permanent improvement for the beautification of downtown, which is one of the big goals of why we would, how we would want to spend this money. I think it's a perfectly appropriate use for the fund. And if it was 25,000 originally, and now we've upped it to like 55 trees, if they're $650 each, then that's like $35,750. Plus, some of them are going to get sponsorships, which, I mean, I know we still have to buy the plants.
Yeah.
But all of this, when you're talking about taking it out of the general fund, there's a ton of labor. And that's being paid for out of the general fund.
Yes, absolutely.
We're not transferring money from the downtown development fund
For that.
into DPW. And this is hours and hours of labor that is going into this. And that's a good use of our labor.
Yeah.
But I think we've already contributed from the operating budget.
Yeah.
And the rest of this is downtown development beautification. So it's
Agreed. And
a
I'm sorry,
perfect use of the fund.
I'm sorry, I don't have that number for me. I should have
That's okay.
from the original presentation. The number that I was referring to, really, you're right, is not a fixed number. It was his anticipated cost of his RFP
Right.
that he was retained for which he was retained. And that number, he really did pluck, because the LEDs were definable, the development of the tree well was not.
Right.
And it kind of grew. I think it grew to a very substantial, what they're doing right now is fortifying what is going to be a fortified install. We didn't envision that. I know Omar didn't envision that. Omar had in his head, you know, like you said, plastic, maybe aluminum. Aluminum is actually more expensive, but it's
We
the
didn't know that. Yeah.
it's the welding detail that this fella is proposing to come in, and he actually is going to measure each one. It's not going to be a fixed. We're trying to make it as symmetrical as possible, but they're not all perfectly symmetrical. So we couldn't buy something which we originally envisioned from the internet and have it delivered and just drop it right in place. We're having piece by piece, and they're all welded together. They're going to be very substantial fortified installations for when, you know, the little kid steps on it or someone bumps into it or trips over it. It's going to protect what the recreation department is going to do as part of the restoration, which is the mulch and the planting detail that they also sent around in the for consideration. So I'm definitely supporting this method. I'm yet to sit with Tom to talk about the procurement logistics of doing it that way. It's sort of like a design build / you know, public project. We can do material purchase. I'll work that out with Tom. But again, I will better define what was originally said in that meeting where it was 90-something thousand, get an idea of where they are with the expenditures of the other soft costs that you mentioned. And if it's within the 97 at that point, then I'd like the authorization to proceed and get going, because we really do want to get as many installed as possible pre summertime.
Just to be clear, you said we're doing 60 trees. Initially, we were going to do 40 trees, or
45 went up to 55, I thought.
I think it was
57.
55. I thought it was 56. But it's yeah.
okay. So we're going to do all the trees at this point.
That's not all the trees.
The light. No, that's
We could
not
keep
all of them.
going.
Okay.
100 if you want to.
No. I'm talking about this is like as far as downtown, right? Like, what is this?
That's not every tree downtown.
Okay.
That is most of the.
How far does it go into Spring Street?
It goes down to Spring and makes it right on Broad.
How
It picks-
far though? Oh, it's to Broad, all the way.
It
Okay.
picks up.
Got it.
It picks up the two. I think there's two on Broad that they lit. They did the ones in front of the cleaners down Spring. They did, you know, those are not as mature, and the other ones I cut way back when we make Spring Street two-way. But that will actually give a nice detail, because they're.
You gotta imagine when you. I mean,
So
like,
it goes all the way
It's really
down
pretty.
past the police station.
No, that's
Oh, no.
Academy.
Okay.
Broad is.
Oh, you weren't talking about Broad Avenue. You were talking about Broadway.
I'm talking about Broad
Oh,
Avenue.
you are
It
talking
goes
about Broad.
past the
Oh, you're
police
right. You're right.
station.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Wow,
It
that
goes
is
all
far.
the- Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's
I'll
part
stop
of the
and see.
definition
The village
of the
center.
downtown.
Yeah.
That's my questions for what defines downtown. It's not like I haven't been there.
So the committee should just look wherever there's tree wells.
There you go.
Tree wells and flowers.
Well, essentially what it does is it kind of picks up our brick
Yep.
pattern detail, and everywhere where there's commercial, we'll have LED on west of 9.
I think we need to figure out what the budget is and how is that working out. I mean, I have no problem with additional trees. I just need to figure out the money wise.
Okay.
And I think that's maybe the concern. of
Well,
some
by
people.
next week, when we do if I may, when I do my manager's report in the next legislative session, I can just update you at that point that this was the amount allotted to the Downtown Development Committee. We've detailed the proposal because the Downtown Development Committee has to pick between a $600 and a $650 alternate on the tree well detail. And once they pick that, and we count the number of wells that we're going to do this install, I will deliver that all next week and see what the bottom line is.
Some of it will come back in sponsorship. So for anybody listening, feel free to become. I think we have legitimately signed up 4 sponsors, but
Yeah.
we're going to get sponsors. It's not.
And short of
People have
Chris's
shown
work,
a lot of interest.
Chris's work is really designed to be absorbed by annual sponsorships. This work is
Is it?
designed to last
Right.
a long, long time.
Right.
And
It's like an adopt a well concept. So you buy 2 years founding members, but then it's every year. But it doesn't pay for all the fixed costs. It's just.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I'm in support of the whole project in general, and I think I'm really only interested in seeing it done once to leverage economy of scale and the opportunity to leverage this individual who's really creating these bespoke fences around. I mean, you have access to somebody who's a local and a craftsman, and somebody who's going to do something really, really unique for the tree wells, and I think that that's very important. And the larger the larger idea is that we're really going to improve the appearance of the downtown, and that's part of our mission and something we should definitely do. I don't want the budget controversy to slow down the process. We have no shortage of resources to pay for things.
Well, you want to say that again?
Let's put that into our contract.
The downtown.
But we've allotted
Oh,
almost
but I'm
$100,000
just saying that we
for this.
have a downtown fund that has
Right.
plenty of
Yeah,
money.
it's not a committee. It's actually a fund.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Actually
So
makes recommendations
yeah,
for the
so
stuff.
I don't want to see this slow down because we're concerned about how much it's going to cost. Because in the context of things, I just don't think it's that much money considering how long it's going to last and the benefit it's going to have for the downtown. I just I see no reason to haggle over a few. I mean, I agree with Manny that we need to understand. We understand what was budgeted, what's happened so far. What's the journey to get us here. I certainly think we need accountability, but I don't want to slow anything down. So
Yeah, I would just request that when a piece of paper, just let me know where we're at, what was approved.
yeah, and even
just
even a map, just to show where all the tree wells are, or just something.
Yeah.
You know.
I just want to see it. I just want to see the numbers.
understood.
It'd be easier.
I'll even try to get you something in advance of the next legislative session, so when I
Yeah.
do talk about it, at least you'll have
I
it.
mean, it
in
looks
hand.
great. I just don't think it could be captured. But even the before and after and those. Could you also? What is the person's name? The welder? I'm sorry. The
It's Arlindo on
Okay.
Central Avenue, and his last name I
Oh.
never knew it.
Oh, okay.
In
You
fact,
know-
wait, I will in a second because I have his proposal right here.
Okay. So I know he's local. I mean, he's right by the firehouse down there, right?
Right.
Right. So
It's
I-
Union Ornamental is the name of the company. I should have said.
okay, but it would be great if he contacted or we contacted the high school. There are a lot of people that would like to learn trades. We actually are hiring him to do a big project. It would be great if some of the high school kids actually got to see as a part of learning about trades. And maybe he could even hire a couple of them to help out.
Well,
I mean,
will,
it's a real
I will
trade.
discuss it with him. There is
Can't
this-
force him to, but
I
if
get
you
it.
could.
This is there's a little liability component. He's going to actually be tack welding these pieces together. So,
Right.
But I will definitely look into that possibility.
So then my only question, when you get the numbers, I assume that because the Downtown Development Fund Council, which makes recommendations on how to spend the money in this fund, I assume that they would be supportive of, if we need to draw more money out of the funds to fulfill this vision, that they would be supportive of that. All right.
I don't vote. I'm a liaison, so
But-
one would
But
think
you
that they would.
liaise, that would
I
be-
liaise.
Is that your?
But I'm a liaise. You know, the part of their discussion is, and I think that is what Paul is saying, is that it's also they're fixing the sidewalk that should have been fixed and all that. They really see it as a combination of the funds both from the village and from the fund for this project so that they have money left over for their other projects that they stood here and talked. So it'll be a discussion. I
Okay.
can't speak on their behalf because I'm a
Understood.
liaison.
I would say that if I were a taxpayer, that the Recreation Department and the DPW have spent a lot of
Yeah.
man hours on this, and it's well worth it. But
Right.
it's definitely a joint venture.
It's going to look really nice.
It's
I'm
great.
excited for it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Show pictures.
Pictures.
Thank you. Our next 5 agenda items are all Corporation Council, starting with a discussion on the possible legislation regarding puppy mills in the village of Ossining. Stuart.
Thank you, Paul. Members of the board, good evening. At last week's legislative session, there was a speaker from the public who asked about the puppy mills, and we had gotten some emails about that previously. I've looked at some of the ordinances that exist in Westchester County, but let me just give an overview first. New York has actually 2 particular statutes, the state, which deal with this. The first is under the Agriculture and Markets Law, which is a fairly detailed statute in terms of minimum standards of animal care, records of purchase. And what's important, and this was what was amended recently, it's that the legislation of the state does not limit or restrict any municipality from enacting any local law, rule, regulation, or ordinance governing pet dealers. And again, pet dealers are people who sell pets as defined in the state. The reason that's important is in Westchester County, they have something called animal facilities. That includes people who groom pets, and those facilities must be licensed by the Westchester County Department of Health. And I have mentioned that actually to the folks in the building department so that if they're checking on any of these places to determine if in fact they have the appropriate county license. But getting back to the state, they have this under the Agriculture and Markets Law, but also under New York's General Business Law, we have what is affectionately known as the Puppy Lemon Law, which is essentially like with your car, but after a certain period of time, if the animal is ill, you can return the animal for a full refund. And that would include not only a full refund plus sales tax, plus any veterinary costs that have been incurred during that period of time. And basically you have a period of, in some situations, up to 180 days following sale to effectuate the return. And New York has its own licensing requirements, some of which have been given to the various counties if the counties have adopted it. What you see in the locations in Westchester County, and that would be Mamaroneck, Portchester, Rybrook has one, Yorktown has one, Mount Pleasant has one, and Harrison, is essentially the same legislation, which is that it shall be unlawful for any person to sell any live dog or cat in any pet store, retail business, or other commercial establishment unless the dog or cat was obtained from an animal shelter or humane society located in the county of Westchester, or a nonprofit rescue and humane organization registered with the New York State Department of Agriculture. Harrison adds one more thing, that if it is a dog that is registered with the American Kennel Club, you are allowed to sell that, regardless of whether or not it is, it's their other restriction in terms of where you can get the pet from.
Right.
It's Harrison. I'm just
It's
pointing that out.
Harrison, so they will pedigree.
But basically, that's the ordinance that you see in all of those places. It limits it then to those particular locations where you can get it from. The idea with regard to this legislation is that you stop getting it from what are referred to as the mills, where these animals come from. Rockland County has done it slightly differently. They have something which is known as the Protect Our Pets Act, which is also based upon the New York state law. And what they do is, as they say, it's a framework for pet dealers and the operation of pet stores that supplement existing state regulations. It is fairly detailed in terms of floor space for the animals, animal enclosures, and information that must be kept for the buyers in terms of this. And they also have it that no pet dealer shall obtain animals from a breeder who's received violations from the United States Department of Agriculture. There is no other ordinance like the Westchester County ordinances I found in anywhere else in Rockland County. I didn't find it in Orange County. I didn't find it in Nassau, Suffolk County. It seems to be here. As I mentioned, Westchester County itself has various ordinances with regard to animal facilities, and Westchester County does require that all such facilities be licensed, and that includes wholesalers, pet shops, stables, kennels, grooming parlors, breeders, trainers, and shelters. The only one that does not have to pay a fee is a shelter, but it does have to be licensed, and the fees are on a sliding scale. And whether the particular locations in this village are in fact so licensed, we don't know. We can always request that because they would be required to provide a license number. And one of the things that the state requires is that once you are licensed, you're supposed to give that number to whoever purchases it. It can be put on all of your advertisements. It can be posted outside your store, sort of like a liquor license provided by the State Liquor Authority. But as I said, the animal ordinances that you see in these other jurisdictions, they're all identical. They clearly came from one place and everyone else has adopted it, just to stop the sale of or obtaining animals from those particular locations other than from shelters or humane societies. As I said, you see this in Westchester. I haven't seen it in other locations, within the immediate area. It's really more a question as to, how the village wants to go with regard to that, as to whether they want to put particular legislation in place to do that. I know that there were questions raised with regard to the location on South Highland Avenue, across from the high school and next to Lucy's. I have been advised by the building department that the proprietor has made it very clear he is not selling any animals at all. The reason the cages are there is because he does grooming, and on occasion people will drop the animals off in the morning and pick them up at night, which is not in violation of our zoning code, not in violation of any ordinance. As I said, the question is, does he have his village license? And that's something that the building department will check out. But that's the sum and substance of what the ordinances are in the locations. As to again, whether the village can pass such an ordinance and enforce it, the state has no problem with that. The key thing is, the one thing you cannot do based on the state legislation is you can't pass an ordinance which effectively prohibits the sale of animals. If you got that granular, your ordinance would be voided by the courts. But if you want to limit how they are sold and where the animals can be obtained from, the village can certainly do that and can add that to its code, under sections dealing with animals or anything like that. Or it can simply follow, just utilize what the state statute is now, which affords protections both with regard to the procuring of the pets and also to individuals who have problems with pets subsequent thereto and can get their full refunds under the general business law. So that's the sum and substance of it.
Any other comments?
I surely think, just so I understand, are there any businesses that are selling pets in Ossining now?
The only one I can,
Dogs and cats only. This is only for dogs and cats.
So
yeah.
if we're talking dogs and cats, the answer, I believe, is no.
I guess that was actually my first question. All of these seem to be limited to dogs and cats.
Correct.
Ferrets and turtles, no problem.
Nope.
not according,
Really, they're not abused the way
all these-
dogs and cats are.
you know, all these ordinances, and in fact, I can point out that the general business law section is sale of dogs and cats.
Yeah.
That's the ability to return the pet if the pet is ill. Doesn't, now, care of animals by pet dealers, again, definition, animal means a dog or a cat.
Yep.
So if you're looking at, for example, larger animals, then you're in a different part of the agriculture and markets. If you're dealing with smaller animals, it's not covered by this. And so it's not part of it. And none of the other ordinances that come up from any of the other jurisdictions, it all talks about sales of live dogs or cats. It doesn't talk about.
I don't care
any
about
of-
guinea pigs and.
No.
Right, all right.
So in other words, what, you know.
I'm not familiar enough to know where the abuse is happening. Apparently, it's just for dogs and cats, or
Dogs.
nobody.
Mostly dogs, I think.
Dogs
I
and
think-
cats have risen to
Sure,
a
it's
certain
mostly
level
dogs.
of status within.
And it's primary, and you see more of the mills, I think, from.
The
from
mills are for
dogs.
dogs. That's where the money is, yeah.
So that, you know, that's where it's seen. But these are all limited to just dogs and cats. They don't expand it beyond that.
I don't. If it's not a complicated piece of legislation for us to pass, it seems like there's a pretty good foundation to be able to pass. I'm certainly not interested in supporting the abusive practices that we know do exist in some puppy mills, whether that's happening currently in Ossining or not. I don't see a reason to not consider passing this legislation that we would be borrowing from some of our neighboring communities. Does anybody have any concerns or objections or
I'm okay with it.
modifications?
Yeah, it's fine with me. I mean, nobody's selling dogs and cats now, so it's not like we.
You're not
would-
putting anybody out of
Yeah,
business.
we wouldn't, I mean, we'd be raising the bar for them to make sure that they were conducting their business properly, but if we were gonna do it, now's the time.
Before we undermine somebody's business.
Well,
plan,
no,
yeah.
before, no,
Exactly.
we're setting the ground rules and what our expectation are for, you know, pet stores to sell cats and dogs. That's what we're doing, and we're backing it up with, you know, state legislation that already exists, so.
There's whispering going on over there. Is there something we're not considering?
I would,
They're just clarifying some logistics, which
Okay.
I'll ask you
so
when
I,
you're done.
so, I mean, I would, you know, you know, I would ask that a draft be put together and we can look at it. I don't know if I might.
Well, the
Yep.
draft is pretty much going to be the same as all the
The draft-
municipalities, except it's going to say Village of Ossining. on
And
it.
we don't need to do that Harrison caveat.
No,
I think they did it because if you want to buy from, what is it, the National Kennel, I mean, those are for the purebred dogs, and it's difficult to buy them, so they made it, they probably had a store that does sell purebred, and
what Harrison has
which is
will
legitimate.
be unlawful for any person to sell any live dog or cat in any pet store within the town of Harrison unless the dog or cat was Animal Shelter,
Right.
Humane Society, or with respect to a dog, such dog has American Kennel Club documentation of its pedigree and is registered with the American
Yeah.
Kennel Club.
So
that's
meaning a reputable breeder.
Yes.
But typically, if you're buying from a reputable breeder, you're buying directly from the breeder.
Right.
I mean,
Today,
because I
yes.
don't know, I'm not a dog person. You're a dog person. Buy from the breeder, right?
I think you're
and,
correct.
and all of these
Well, they
things.
buy them, yeah, and they ship them over, so they wouldn't need that, but they must have enough people that would like to have it more local, that they're buying from
Might be.
breeders.
Might
Yeah.
be.
I don't think we're gonna cut off anybody's business here
None-
that wants
No.
to sell purebreds in the store in Ossining.
Nonetheless, what I was whispering with Stuart about was how fast he can turn around a draft, and of course, his answer is always a day or two. So, yeah. So, should he have it out to you all in this weekend's mailings? Is it okay to consider putting a public hearing on next legislative session?
Sure, I think it's a call for
It's a
the
call
public
for public
hearing, so
hearing.
it'll be,
I'm
it'll be
sorry,
weeks
call for
before that
public
happens, so.
hearing.
All right.
Yes, please.
That would be fine.
And,
Okay.
and I did want to just clarify,
Sure.
from your explanation of now that I'm getting up to speed on what all of these, this whole world of grooming and such that I wasn't aware of, the grooming license, that is all through the county, or does the village have?
County.
It's all the county,
County
okay.
license. County Department of Health requires that.
So any of those pet-related establishments that we have in the village, our building department is probably now a little more aware of some of the
Right.
things they might ask for now that we've got
Because
this.
I have it here, the county has a much broader definition and actually has had that definition. County ordinance has been in effect since 1987. And animal facilities include stable, salon, kennel, shelter, parlor, I don't know,
Spa.
Where animals are exhibited, bred, groomed, sold. The only exception are private homes, zoological parks, aquariums, laboratories, and educational institutions. So basically, everything else that, where you'd have an animal for any purpose is considered a facility, and a license is required by the county.
You're allowed to breed in your own property?
Sure.
You are, and in fact, depending on, part of it depends on if you're going to be breeding and then selling. The question is, how many do you sell? There's a limit. I think it's, in some situations it's 25, in other ones it's 9, depends. So I'm just pointing that out.
That's a noticeable amount. Okay.
The only other thing just to discuss in terms of
You need at least two.
all the ordinances are just a slight bit different on each is in terms of the penalties. They're all financial penalties, but some, it's generally $250 for the first violation, $500 for the second, and $1,000 for the third. Some call it a misdemeanor, some call it just a violation. We can work that out, but we can certainly call for a public hearing, at next week's.
Oh, we have to call for public hearing for this?
Yeah,
It's in law. Yeah. All right.
so we'll do that.
Thank you.
Sure.
And we'll keep it with Stuart. We're going to further along the discussion of your board consideration of legislation regarding gas-powered leaf blowers, which we started discussing in our last work session, and we'll continue to do that this evening. Stuart.
Thanks, Paul. The reason I put this on here is I think that there was a discussion that we were going to consider sending out questionnaires or something to business owners before we drafted anything, and I didn't know exactly how we were going to accomplish that. I'd gone over, I think last time with the board, a number of the different ordinances that exist. Primarily, they limit either dates or they limit hours when use. The village's ordinance is essentially a time and decibel limit. But the real question I think that was brought up by some of the board members is the businesses that might be affected by this, and what's the view of the various homeowners in the area or those. So I thought there was some sense of communicating. I think someone asked if we could do it through water bills. Could we put something in there and ask? And I think Paul's response back was that the bills are not sent out all the same time. Okay, everyone's quarter, I think, starts at a different period. So I don't know, in terms of how that's going to be communicated or questioned or where that's going to be generated from. But I'm happy to, discuss what the other ordinances are. But I think we did go into that, about 2 weeks ago.
We left it that we were going to do a postcard mailing.
Right.
But I don't know that we ever determined what are we asking and who is it going to? Is it going to every resident in the village? Are we, what are we hoping to learn from this mailing? I don't think we narrowed it down enough. And I do want us to give some action items to the staff so that we can.
There were
move
two.
forward.
One was we were concerned about employment. We have a lot of landscapers
Correct.
and a lot of local employment, which could be disrupted. And I thought it was going to be just some conversation with Ossining, like I say rental, but it's lawnmowers, right? Because they're knowledgeable in the industry. It's not to say they employ landscapers, but since that's their business, I was envisioning a phone call actually to them and just say, look, this is a consideration since you're in this business. How do you think it affects local, like how many people, how many businesses, and just, I expect to have some phone calls if we can get a list of who are the landscapers in the area that we need to contact. There might be landscapers who aren't located here, but they employ people from here as well. Their clients are here. So we get a list of that. I think a phone call to some of them would be, what are the pros and cons of doing something like this? This is your industry. Like, what's the industry conversation about it? 10 phone calls. It doesn't have to be more than that. The cards, I think, were more for neighborhoods, right? And I don't think we said it's everybody. I thought that we might want to do like a proxy of choosing 4 or 5 neighborhoods, because I think there was a comment, we're going with the conversation, there are neighborhoods that are all rentals. So that stuff should also go to the management company who's hiring them to find out who they're using, but it should go to like a few of the buildings in the area. In other words, you could do a proxy if you want to save some money. If you've got 5 buildings, you could choose just 2 buildings, because what 2 buildings stays the same as all 5 that are in the same exact spot, hearing the same noise. I mean, just so you're not sending 25,000 how many postcards we sent? Actually, 8,500 or so,
We have over
10,000.
5,000 properties or units. I don't know how to.
Yeah. 8,000 it would be, yeah. All the rentals,
8,000
co-ops, condos,
units. So it's 5,000 properties. Is that where the number is in my head?
something.
Parcels.
Well, it would be,
Anyway.
I guess.
This is a
I'm
knowable
just saying,
thing.
I'm just saying you don't have to send 100% of everything. You could sort of pick out the different neighborhoods and send enough that you get an idea. I mean, that's how people do surveys. They do proxies. They don't survey 100%. They survey 10, 20, 30% and say, the questions are, is the noise bothering you? Is this a problem? I mean, what are we trying to find out, right? If
Well,
the noise is that bothersome and what hours they're at.
Well, I think, you know, there's a larger collateral issue that I think has to do with pollution. I mean, that, you know, and the noise. You know, I think, you know, these, you know, the gas or gas oil mixture engines are, you know, the pollution that comes from them and the noise factor are significant. And I would want to understand the impact of moving more towards, you know, electric equipment, you know, with batteries and things like that, that would have, you know, less of an environmental impact. And I believe that some of the ordinances speak to that, right? Isn't that correct? There's reference to the use of the difference between using an electric leaf blower, you know, as opposed to, you know, one that's you know, carbon driven with an oil gas mixture. And to me, that's kind of a larger conversation. And I would want to understand, you know, how businesses that you know, that do this type of work would be impacted by having to use, you know, an alternative, which would be, you know, leaf blowers that are, I mean, some of these things are pretty powerful, even the electric ones, they're certainly equal to that. And I think that the carbon footprint would be reduced significantly to do the same amount of work. So I would like to see that conversation or that thing addressed as part of the canvas to understand, you know, what the potential business impact would be. Because that's my objection to the leaf blowers, to be honest with you, is that they smell horrible. They're very, very noisy, extremely noisy. You know, some of them have been around forever.
So you understand in a building that's not an issue. I mean, you don't survey to say, do you want more or less pollution? I think the answer, you know, that's a different discussion.
Well,
in a building you'd have
well,
electricity, but in a house, not all
okay,
houses.
you wouldn't ask that
know.
question to people to live in a building necessarily, but you'd want to, you know, I mean, I'd want to understand the economic impact of,
Right.
of having people having to switch from
There you go.
carbon, you know,
Yeah.
carbon-based machines to battery-powered and electric ones
Right.
that would have a significantly reduced carbon footprint. So, you know, that's how I look at it.
I also look at it as think about the person who's actually holding the machine. I mean, someone's breathing that in. So I mean, I don't know exactly how much in the weeds we want to get into this situation, but there's also that aspect of you know, there's one thing to reach out to the employer. It's the next thing to actually think about the employee who's actually going around. You know,
I understand, but in many houses, there's no electrical outlets in some of them outside. That's why they use that. If you're doing a half an acre and you're doing 5 or 10 houses a day, some of the homeowners would say, I don't actually have an electric plug they can just plug into outside. They're inside my house and they can't come in my house.
No, they use
So
battery
we
powered.
just have
They
to,
use battery powered ones. I mean, they don't have to be plugged in.
or you get an extension cord.
I mean, there's all kinds of ways to do this.
You know,
So what I'm hearing is that the postcard would be going out to essentially property owners or folks who live in the community. We would open with some sort of a statement expressing that the village is exploring the possibility of imposing, that's not a good word, but some limitation of the use of gas-powered leaf blowers. And then a series of simple questions. Do you personally use a gas-powered leaf blower on your property? Do you hire landscapers who use a gas-powered leaf blower on your property? Do you find leaf blowers to be disruptive to something? And like, is this what we're going for? You know, please check yes or no and send it back.
Yes,
And we could do it online as well.
correct. And part of
Easier online, actually.
well, a lot of people may not have access to
Yeah.
all of it. So I think that's where we left the last time. The biggest concerns, I guess, it was just by the way, I bought an electric lawnmower about 2 weeks, so I'm excited to use it hopefully this weekend. It was pretty cheap, actually, a lot cheaper than gas. So, but anyway,
Smaller.
and dual. Anyway, enforcement part I think was part of
Yeah.
one of my concerns. How the municipalities do the enforcement, because my understanding, I think some municipalities is the building department who enforces this. I would like to understand, regardless of how we do this, if we pass a legislation regarding to noise pollution and gas, who's going to be enforcing and how we're going to handle that. I think that's more the critical portion in my end. I think the survey part is essential because we do have a lot of, I want to say, local small businesses that do a lot of landscape, and I think that would be a concern. And I agree with you, Rika, in regards to buildings. We should not be emailing to all the units. It should be definitely to the management office that handles that part of the outside maintenance. So I think it's a little bit of maybe the planning, maybe our planner be able to help us out with some of that stuff and kind of be like, all right, this is the units we should be doing the mailing part. I think that could be a key portion in how we do this. So
I don't think the cards are expensive or the mail, Paul. I think it's just putting it together and getting it out, because cards today are like nothing. It's 1,000 cards or 5,000. It's a couple $100. It's nothing.
it's about, if you do half a village,
Right.
it's about $900. So that's what I did last
Oh, okay,
time.
really? Wow.
We bulk mail.
Less than that.
We bulk mail every year, and it's a little less than 2,000 for the entire village for our newsletter, which is a little larger. So we could maybe do a 1-card bulk mailing for less than 1,000 to a fixed.
Like I said, I did a while back. I did half of the village, and that's about $800.
Okay. My mailings are smaller.
Stuart,
Yes.
in theory, could I'm just thinking about enforcement. If this were to go through, couldn't a resident just call the police department to, I guess the same way if there was a noise complaint,
Yeah.
you could just call the police department and say, hey, someone's using a gas blower?
The answer is yes, and in fact, in a lot of these locations, the enforcement can be by a code enforcement officer, building inspector, or village police department, or the police can actually enforce it.
Which makes good sense, because I think a large part of the issues where it's going to be violated are going to be on off hours and weekends,
Correct.
where the police are going to be the logical responder.
Yeah.
And I
And it's
think-
going to be an instant response as well. It's going to be
and I-
more
Correct,
adapted to a
and I think
police
that's
action.
part of the education portion that we have to send out as well, and if this resolution at some point passes, after we kind of understand the whole situation and understand that our community itself, it's essential that we tell that to the neighbors, tell to whoever has a complaint to pretty much reach out either to the building department or the police. So,
When you do this as a law, you have to put in some sort of a time frame, because people own equipment, including individuals.
Right.
If they own something that costs $400 or $500, and now you're making them go buy something, there has to be either a grandfathering effect, or it's sort of not fair to drop it on, July 1st, and now everybody's got to switch over equipment. Some people may have just bought it. It's a financial burden.
Well, you're already in May, so you may not have it for this summer anyway. But if you made it effective, you
So
gave,
you have to give people
because
a chance.
we can, in terms of effective dates, I mean, if you can always put into the ordinance what the effective date is gonna be. If you're silent, it's
Consider
20
that.
days after it's filed, but otherwise you can put in any date you want it to be effective.
So, but also, we weren't talking about, there's a range of what we could do an all-out ban. You're not allowed to,
Right.
not welcome in our village, or it could be certain hours or certain times of the year.
Exactly right, which is what you
So-
see in most places,
Right.
There are, I haven't, even in the places that say you can't use a gas-powered leaf blower, let's say between Memorial Day and Labor Day, they don't say that during the rest of the year you can't. In other words, I think there may have been only one place that actually said you can't use them. Otherwise, it's pretty much on a time basis as to when you can do it, either during a particular day or during a season or something like that.
And I think what I would be most in favor of would be, and we'll see what the community comes back with. We might be surprised at the level of concern about it, but I don't think we want to eliminate the possibility of people having landscapers come at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday and use a gas-powered leaf blower. I mean, I think mostly we're talking about when it's a quality of life disruption is on the weekends and the evenings.
You had actually shared with us the most common one, which was the months and then the hours.
That's exactly right, yeah.
I mean, when we're asking the questions, I would propose that we're thinking of doing this in order to do X, Y, and Z. That's how I position it. I think this is an open discussion, kind of survey. You'll get answers all over the place. I think you want to get this is just a way to include the community in things that we're changing. It's what we're thinking of doing because there have been issues about this. And there have been by a few people about noise and pollution, all that. So do you want to help framing the survey? Do you want to send it?
I'm doing a draft. I'm sending to all of us and everybody.
Oh, okay.
So since we're talking about mailing things to residents, would it should we actually come up with something about our different boards and committees just mailing that out as well? I mean, since we're mailing.
Just put a totally different subject on the same little card to try.
No, not on the same card. It's
Okay.
separate.
Oh,
A separate.
One subject per card.
Yeah.
Okay.
A separate newsletter since we're thinking about mailing out because I don't think everybody looks at our Facebook.
Are you suggesting that maybe we should more regularly do mailings as an opportunity for reaching out to the community and
Absolutely.
communicating a variety of topics?
Absolutely.
I think that's in theory a great idea, and that could be the next subject.
So, I mean, because it seems like if this is our pattern where we engage the community with mail outs, like every time we change a law, then we should probably just communicate with our residents.
Changing a law is one thing.
Yeah.
I mean, there are different subjects.
But no, I just think it would be valuable.
I like the idea.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna figure it all out tonight, but I
Yeah.
like the idea. Let's get through this one.
Okay. All right.
Okay,
Corporation Council.
Next.
done with that. Want me to keep going?
Keep going.
Okay. Next on our list is the discussion of the enforcement of Local Law 3, 2017, which is, you folks know, is the code enforcement ordinance. It is already in effect as of May 1st. It was filed with the Secretary of State. The building department has been notified, and although it is not yet in E-code, it has actually been sent to the MuniCode folks to get the publication done. They are uploading the changes that we've made, so all of their tickets, OTRs, appearances, everything like that going forward will now be based upon the new ordinance. I've sent a copy of the ordinance to the Justice Court and again invited the judges if they wish to have a meeting with me to go over it. But they have a copy of the ordinance. I don't think anything's been written yet based upon the ordinance. I've also spoken to Joe Augustinelli, and at next week's meeting, I think perhaps he can go into greater detail as to the rollout, particularly as to operating permits in the first phase of the fire and property maintenance inspections. There are obviously going to be far more fire and property maintenance than operating permits. I think we're looking at only about 60 locations that require the operating permits, but there will be a letter going out to those particular business owners because they must apply for the permit, and to get the permit, they need to have the inspection. So, but that's basically all going into effect. And now that the law is in effect, everyone from the building department is aware of really what they need to do and cite to the correct sections. To assist the folks in the building department, Deputy Corp Counsel Bill Hamilton and I have been reviewing the orders to remedy violations and appearance tickets before they go out and before they're served to make sure that they properly quote the particular ordinance that is claimed to be violated, so that we're all sort of working from the same template with regard to that. And that's been taking place and continues to take place. Because one of the things that we do is we get together every Friday to basically go over the following week's court calendar and see where things are. But that is now in effect. And just if you folks also, with regard to the weight restriction legislation that we passed before that, that is also now in effect with regard to those streets. That was in effect, I think, just a couple of days ago. So both of those two new local laws are now fully in effect. But with regard to the code enforcement, the building department knows that they have a lot of work ahead of them because things will now be based completely upon those sections. It does not just go to code enforcement. There's a lot of record keeping that they will have to do now in terms of what they're handling within the building department. I've gone over that with Joe, and one of the things that Bill and I do when we're there on our Fridays is to go over the various sections with the code enforcement folks so that they know, what they're doing. I'll let the board know when we start seeing OTRs and violations written based upon the new code. Obviously, everything that is in the court now is still based upon the prior code, and that will probably be the case for at least a little while, because there are a good number of those that are still percolating through the system. But anything going forward is obviously based upon the new local law.
Stuart, there a couple of people have asked me in the community if folks want to understand what's different today than it was last month.
Right.
Property owners that are going to be directly impacted. How can they learn about what they need to do differently? Or is there, I think you were talking about there's going to be some sort of form or list of basic expectations for a building. Maybe I should be looking at you now for how the building inspection, what's going to be looked at when the inspection takes place. I know we're going to be reaching out by letter and expressing that we want people to sign up or to schedule an appointment.
I think the most noticeable change is going to be in the fire inspections, being that we really weren't doing those outside of the beverage inspections.
Exactly correct.
And it's going to really encompass everybody now from 3-family or more or a commercial establishment. And I believe it's the intent, as they do roll out the inspection schedule, to contact the establishment or the residential building to be inspected in advance and say, this is what we're coming to do, this is what you should expect, and this is going to be the first of your triannual, and introduce the program to them that way. And it's not going to be the day of, it's not going to be sudden, if you will. It's going to be a very methodical process as they lay out their schedule.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it would be good to have, some kind of FAQ or, something out there that kind of, well, this is what used to be, and this is what you can expect now. I think that kind of a document that would go out in general to which, I mean.
But as far as what's different, there's not a whole lot different as what they're expected to have in their building that exists now. It's this adoption, and Stuart can chime in here, is really facilitates appropriate enforcement and processing and prosecution. But what a building owner should be expected to do today versus last month is not so different.
I think that's an important message that we haven't really clarified, and we need to make clear. And maybe it doesn't need to be anything any more complicated than whatever you're including in the body of those letters, saying this is what to expect when we schedule your inspection, is we're going to be looking at this list of areas, however you're phrasing it, for us to have that available online and just to say.
Yeah, because the fire inspection is, in fact, it's a form, and that can easily be posted so people can see.
Yeah, what to expect at your fire inspection.
I mean, these are the things they're going to be looking for, and there's no reason that can't be done. Same for an operating permit, so that people will know this is what your inspection is going to be, what you can expect. But as Paul is correct, it's essentially just making sure that we enforce the state code and how that's to be enforced. And there will now be more enforcement than before. But frankly, the building owner should have had. We haven't added anything in that regard. So, but that's fine. We can certainly put that out so that they know that, and make sure that's all taken care of.
Sounds like a workshop for me.
Hey, you love those, so.
I do. Actually, Stu, Paul, and Joe Agostinelli and myself had a productive internal meeting last week, which I think a lot of cool stuff are going to be happening in regards to the building department itself, in regards to the forms and everything
Right.
else. So very productive. And it was in regards to some of the. This is before we actually heard that the
Correct.
it went through. So I'm happy with a lot of the stuff that's happening in the building department right now.
I don't know if I've ever heard you say that.
I know, somebody just
4 years, I don't know if
That's
I've
kind
ever.
of scary. I don't know.
Take a
man.
60
Rewind.
second. Let's just
Well,
take 60
It's
seconds.
been
and
about
let
4
that all
years
sink
for me
in.
to say that.
So
So
thank you to everybody at the table and everybody at the building department that's making Manny happy. That's important.
that's it. Some stuff are happening.
All right,
Don't take it back so quickly.
take what we can get.
Stuart, I just have a side note.
Yes, sir.
A resident came to me this weekend, and there was some issues with an apartment. And so I went through the process of actually notifying the building department through the online submission. And then it occurred to me that we require people to give their name. So then I went and Googled anonymous code enforcement. And there are certain communities that don't actually require the complainer to give their name, but just the name of the management company or the landowner. Are we able to do that?
Yeah, I'm not. Unfortunately,
I
I'm not that familiar with the online complaint form as far as what's required and what's not required. I didn't believe, and as far as I've witnessed, they have taken anonymous complaints. You know, if there's a level of detail or credibility to them, they will investigate an anonymous.
Because I think there's like an asteroid at the name part. I don't even know if you can actually asterisk where you.
By phone, it can be anonymous,
Yeah.
but it is set up to
Yeah.
have contact information because it's a contact form online, so they
Yeah.
always want to be able to respond to people so they don't get spammed
Thank
and
you.
stuff.
Well,
but-
how would, if it's online and they wanted to email back, how would they?
I mean, you can have an email address.
Right, you wouldn't need an actual.
You wouldn't
name.
actually my name.
Take the
Exactly.
aspects out, actually.
Yeah.
Out of that whole form, you really, because that just implies it's necessary.
Yeah.
That, of
You know,
course,
that's-
assumes that it's a complaint that's within, let's say, a common area. If it's
Okay.
obviously a complaint within an apartment, presumably they're going to have to get into the apartment to do that. Now, I don't know if the person would want to give their name because they're going to know what unit it's going to,
Right.
someone's going to know, in that sense. But, I suspect the form could be changed so that you don't have that drop-down box. You just have it that they can put in, they want to put
The
an email
name's
or
no
something.
longer a required field.
Yeah. I think that would be.
To look at that.
I think that would be
because it might
helpful.
Just be an online
That's
versus
fine.
a phone thing.
We can check.
It's no big deal.
We certainly
Yeah.
don't want to discourage people from reporting
Yes.
safety concerns.
Or at least want to be consistent with what you can do across the board. The same activity.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Anything else on that law?
Sound good.
What are we up to?
This was actually your question, Rika, but you wanted to rephrase it or frame
Well,
it.
I sort of have a problem, and I just don't know what the solution is, to be honest with you. Oh, I'm sorry, Stuart, this is yours. You were going to discuss it. yes?
With your,
No, please.
To introduce it.
It's Stuart enlightening us on one of your questions. So yeah, pose the query.
Pose the query. So, we get invited and I think this is what I've discussed with a couple of people here. So we get invited because we're trustees to many, many functions. It's in the couple hundred a year category. And many of them are fundraisers for all sorts of great reasons and all sorts of stuff. But at the door, you're expected to pay whatever the amount is. $75, $50, whatever it is. It's, for some of us, it's a financial burden. Also because we're being invited as trustees. I mean, 90% of these organizations, I really have personally not much to do with, except that now that I'm a trustee. So for me, as being one of the newer trustees, not the newest because you're newer than I am. Some of these fundraisers, sort of simply say, you're invited as a trustee, as a guest, whatever. Some we do something at, we're there for 5 minutes and we leave, and we all get invited. This is not any one of us. And what I said to the mayor is that I'd like to go to these. I get invited, so I'm forced to say yes or no, but if I say yes, I'm forced to pay out of my own money for organizations, and there's so many of them. And so I'm trying to find a solution for how, I'm not sure that I want the taxpayers to pay, but to come up with a policy so that we're all in the same boat in informing not-for-profits that when they invite us as trustees, that as a policy, we do not pay, we don't use our funds or taxpayer funds unless we, so desire, I guess. I mean, there are some organizations I'm a part of, which I was even before a trustee. Some, to me, it's an awkward situation, and it's not a small amount of money. And the only reason I'm being invited is because I'm a trustee, to be honest with you. So I'm trying to figure out how to do it. I work in not-for-profit, so we have a policy that the board set that we do not donate to any charities, that we don't use money donated to us to then turn around and buy a table at whatever. Because it's a policy, when we do get invited, we simply say, we have a policy in place that says that we're happy to go, but we can't, we're not allowed, we don't pay, so we can be invited as guests. It's very easy to do that because there's a policy about that. So if there is no solution, that's fine. I saw some of your responses, but it talks about having a fund or paying. That's a little bit different than what I'm sort of looking for.
Okay. I mean, I
I guess we can simply say, I'll come, but I don't want to pay, but it's there's certain expectations. It's like sort of a social contract.
Well, but I'm not going to get into that part of it in terms of what the various organizations think.
Right.
From a legal perspective, again, the village can't give money to somebody because it would otherwise be considered a gift, and that's unconstitutional. If, however, whatever is. No county, city, town, village, or school district shall give or loan any money or property to or in aid of any individual. And that's the no gift clause of the New York State Constitution. It's under that where sometimes an individual is seeking to have legal expenses paid for
Right.
a lawsuit that they brought, which was found that they didn't have to bring, they don't get those expenses paid. And there are circumstances where there's an exception to that rule, which does not apply to this circumstance. It would be if there was a grave criminal conduct and for some reason the village decided to pass an ordinance which allowed it effectively to be sued for certain criminal conduct. That's an exception which doesn't really apply here, obviously. But generally you have to be careful of the gift clause in terms of what you do and to what you do. And where it comes down to is that if, as I pointed out in my note to you folks, to two of you, the village law does say that actual and necessary expenses of all officers and employees shall be a village charge. The question is, what is actual and necessary? If you're going out to dinner with someone to discuss village business, that's a necessary expense. If you're simply going to a fundraiser because they invited you, and the argument is, well, this is an entity that is important, that does something for the municipality, maybe. If you're just going because you're invited, the answer would be no. So there's a line there in terms of what you're doing. And you also get into circumstances, what is the relationship with that particular nonprofit? Which nonprofits are you choosing to essentially pay, and which are you not choosing to pay? Whether they're inviting you as a trustee, and should they then basically say, we're not expecting we're not expecting all 5 of you to come, but
Right.
if one comes, we're going to comp the one person who comes because, they shouldn't have to be doing that. But, you can develop a policy, but again, the key is it necessary, and is it an actual and necessary expense to do the job? And I should point out that under New York's public officers law, only public officials who do not get any remuneration can get all their expenses paid. And if you do get paid, generally you're much more limited in terms of your ability to get your expenses paid back. So in terms of this, it's really critical as to what the function is. If it's just that you're going to a particular event and it's becoming expensive, which I can understand, it's probably not something that you want the village to do. This is not like membership dues, like with NICOM or Westchester municipal officials, where there is a benefit to the municipality. But let me just say this: if you can articulate a benefit to the municipality for going, then there's a reason that it can be done. But one hates to use the phrase slippery slope, but it can become that.
I hear what you're saying. I guess let me give some examples. So because I don't know what's considered a benefit to the municipality to
Right.
go. This came up, and not to point out any one organization, although I'll highlight them because it's a wonderful organization, and they were honoring another wonderful organization. And the village was asked to give a proclamation. The town gave a proclamation. New York State legislatures gave a proclamation. The county gave a proclamation. And we all get invited when there's, in this case, it was the Lions Club, and they have their Uplinger Award every year, and they give it to a wonderful person or organization that does great work in the community. And this year, it was the food pantry, and there was a whole table of folks from the food pantry. We got to learn so much about the organization. I'm overwhelmingly humbled by the incredible work that they do. It was I sat at a table with other people who do great work in the community, and we talked about the village the whole time. And I stood up, and for 6 minutes at most, I said, "You guys are wonderful. Thank you so much. Here's a plaque." Because I was asked to do that. I did that, along with colleagues from all the other levels of government. It's a wonderful organization. I'm happy to support the Lions Club. They do one big dinner a year. But what Rika's saying is true. It's a financial burden. That came out of my family's budget. I had a, whatever it was, $40, $50, $60 dinner that night. And I didn't even eat the meat, like whatever. But I was there. I was there because I was representing the village. I'm not a Lion, though they do a wonderful organization, and I'm happy to support them personally. But it's an obligation, and I would never have been there if I were not the mayor of Ossining. I was clearly there on official business. Does that meet the standards that you're talking about?
Well, in one of the cases I sent to you, dealt with a situation involving Batavia, New York, of all places, and what happened there, and Genesee County.
Oh, thanks. Really, I'm embarrassed. I'm going to take a geography lesson. Every time you mention some of these towns, I have no idea where they are.
But what happened there, that was a situation, and this was to try to get reimbursed for legal expenses. A member of the city council there brought a lawsuit, and the lawsuit got dismissed. And he sought his legal actually what he sought was just a $210 filing fee. It was not, and the case was dismissed immediately. And he did not get his $210. And in fact, the Attorney General, in an opinion, said you're not entitled to it because bringing that was not part of your official duties as a city council person. Now, do the official duties of the Board of Trustees include going to these particular events?
Well, if you're giving plaques and...
Well, it varies because keep in mind that under the charter, you have specific, you have legislative duties and you have general duties that are laid out there. There's nothing explicit that deals with this. But at the same point, what you want to look at, as I've said before, is does the particular event that you're going to, or what you're trying to do, does it serve the interest of the municipality? Because that's really also what you're looking at. Because if it serves the interest of the municipality in some way, the argument can certainly be made, particularly under the village law that I cited before, that you would have a basis to be compensated. One of the examples, there was an opinion from the state comptroller back in 1981 where some members of the board went out to dinner with some business executives, and basically they said the village there could pay for everyone's dinner because it was all related to the business of the municipality. It's an elastic term. It's simply.
But you're not being compensated because the bill will go directly to the village. It's not a...
Well, I don't know how it worked at that particular location, so I don't know. But I could not come up with any specific example that was on all fours with the question asked here.
Okay.
There are a lot of cases dealing with not-for-profits in terms of ethic violations and making sure that one is staying true to Article 18 of the General Municipal Law, but nothing specifically with this. Again, can it be done? Yes, but there are a lot of caveats and things that have to just be careful in terms of which organizations you're dealing with. How much money is ultimately going to, be spent from village coffers. Those kind of things would obviously have to be considered on this kind of thing. And it may be something you want to have a policy on, and the policy being you just don't do it. I mean, it's as simple as that, and the organization has to understand that. So that would be the simplest one.
I would say, having carried a couple of proclamations, if you're there to give a proclamation, you give the proclamation and you go. I mean, it's up to you. And if you feel that the obligation to give, I mean, one of the reasons we raise money is for events like these. So,
Just let me clarify, when you raise money, you're talking about your particular
Yeah.
fundraisers for this. I
Yes.
just wanted to make it
Yes.
clear as a campaign part
Yes.
of to be
That's
elected.
That's a different.
It's different.
We're not talking about those. That's
Yeah.
actually,
That's not a use, that's not.
that's
a-
actually exactly, you're not allowed to do. We understand. That's not what we're
I mean,
talking about.
listen. I mean, you bring up something that you just said, Stuart, was kind of interesting, and it's like, so how do you define, the purpose of our duties in relationship, to the village of Ossining as a community? I mean, one could argue that proclamations and the raising up of individuals or organizations within our village that provide a benefit or make our place better, one could argue that proclamation and that recognition is an important part of the fabric of our village, an important part of the fabric of who we are. Okay, so I mean, under the broad definition that you gave me, I can sit here and argue and say that by going to an event and giving a proclamation, that is in fact a benefit to the village, because if we choose not to recognize anybody, what are we doing here?
I understand.
What's going on? So I find this quite interesting, and certainly not only intellectually, but as somebody who feels very strongly that we need to acknowledge those individuals and those organizations that make our village better, and I understand Rika's discomfort, where you're invited to go to these things, and I mean, they're
Well,
nonprofits. They're trying to raise
It's
money.
an interesting, I mean, I think we don't have to discuss all tonight, but honestly, the IRS, when it looks at business, right? If you discuss certain number of minutes I mean, they have all these rules, right? And the reason they do that is because if you're having dinner, dinner is dinner, you're eating, but the reason you're not paying, the reason your company's paying is because it's a business meeting. It doesn't all have to be a business meeting. You could be there for 2 hours and discuss business for 30. So I would say that when we go to a lot of these functions, it is one of the most, I cannot speak for everybody, although I think some of the folks here would argue even more or stronger than I do, that we do nothing but village business. When I go to some of these events, not to your jestings, which are beautiful, and I love them, because, but that also, I mean, honestly, when I went last time, by the time I walked from the table to the ladies' room, there was nothing but people asking me about what's going on in the village. There was nothing but business. In fact, I sometimes don't want to do things here because it is nothing but discussing village business. It is the most open form of communication that we have. It is the most effective way of being in the community. If I never sat at these business meetings that we do on Wednesdays and only went to those affairs, I'd be actually conducting more. It's more a representation of our village, whether it's the fairs, the this, the that, than almost anything else. It's the biggest source of communication that we have, in my opinion, when we go to a lot of these fights, especially in this village where there's just so much going on all the time. Some of them, by the way, aren't even in this village. They're like an hour from here. So that's what brought it to my mind, is that in a business, even the IRS agrees that if you're sitting there for 20 minutes out of 2 hours, even though you're eating dinner and you're benefiting, your company pays for it. Here, we are actually working for our job as representing the public. That doesn't mean, by the way, that we don't go to our own stuff. I still sit on things and am happy to raise money and pay money and do all this stuff. That's not the point.
So let me ask you this, Stuart, and I don't know if we're splicing hairs here, but if we're going out to dinner with a local business owner or a local head of an organization to talk about some project in the village, she could turn in her receipt and say, this was a business dinner. I talked about the village.
Absolutely.
Could we, the next time we're invited, or if we had a policy that said this, say to the organization, we are very excited to be there, delighted to represent the village, we'll bring a proclamation, we'll be there. Could you please tell us what is the actual cost of our meal? Because the village will cover the cost of the meal, but the village then wouldn't be paying the fundraising donation on top of that.
Do that if you wanted to do
Would
that.
that be a legitimate? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's to go back to what Trustee Codman was saying, it's a benefit to the municipality. It's not just a benefit to the board. It's to the whole municipality. You're recognizing what this particular entity does. How you recognize that, you can. I don't see a problem with doing that. You could certainly ask that and make that request. It's a paying for a meal, an expense, a simple expense, and that way, that would clearly, I don't think, be an issue at all, because that's an actual and necessary expense.
So then,
Would be
And they're required by law, right? Because as a not-for-profit, at least the 501Cs and 503s have to actually they have to know which part of the $100 they're asking you for is actually the food, like the service,
Right.
which is not the part of the fundraising.
so
So they're supposed to know that. You're supposed to.
John, your mic.
Yeah, so that actually would make sense, because the rest is the fundraising part. Honestly, if this was a one-time event, I would not even be discussing it, but this is,
Every weekend.
it's 3 a weekend.
So, it could be. I mean, it could be all weekend long every week, especially with certain seasons. But what we could do is the next time we get invited to a dinner, then it would be on us. We could say, I'm happy to do it. We can pay our full $50 and say, how much of this is my dinner? Understand how much of that is our dinner, and submit the $25 that is the cost of the food for reimbursement to the village.
I would think that would be okay.
People feel like that is appropriate?
Well,
I
it's
mean,
a choice too. It doesn't mean we have to. It just
it's on
means that we
us.
can.
It's on us to go through that extra
We don't
effort,
have to
but-
do it, but if we felt that we wanted to, because it's something we really would not have gone, and the meal is $39 out of the 50 that they're asking, we'd be allowed to do that because it's a meal that's a part of the deal. If we didn't want to do it and we want to give them $50, that's
Right.
our choice.
Yeah, don't feel like doing the paperwork? Don't do the
Alright,
paperwork.
so just to be in a record, I just feel uncomfortable with this whole conversation at all.
I know
And
you
I
do,
think, and it's for many reasons, and that's one of the reasons I don't do a fundraiser. I didn't get a raise. To me, the definition, it doesn't matter if it's not on the charter, if it's in the charter. To me, the definition of public servant, this is what we do for our community. This is what we chose to do. This is our choice. We weren't forced. None of us sitting in this board and this table were forced to be a trustee. We chose to do this. So if we're choosing to do that, that's how I feel that we get back to our community, not just with sitting down here until sometimes midnight, sometimes 1 o'clock. But that's our job. That's our part-time job, so to speak.
Right.
So for the record, I'm out of this conversation. I serve my community as much as I can. I choose not to go to some events. I select to where I go. It's not because just because of the money. It's just because there's other stuff going on in my life as well. So that's what I am. So if the board wants to do something, that will be up to the rest of the board members. But I'm not comfortable with this conversation at all. So
Manny, I hear what you're saying, and I know we've kind of had similar conversations in the past, so I'm not at all surprised by your reaction to it. It is a luxury, an absolute luxury, to be able to dedicate as much time as any of us do to this. And many, many people in our community cannot afford the childcare they would need to for the hours that they're here, for the hours that they would be going to these dinners, never mind the expense to be able to attend them. And so the more expensive it is to do this job and to do it well, the fewer people can even consider running for office, especially in this community. That is the reason to have this conversation. That is the reason for the 25% raise. It's to offset the financial demands of people in this community who are of limited means, which is the majority of us.
I understand that and I respect that. again, that's my prerogative. That's
It
my
absolutely
beliefs.
is.
So,
But
and
putting the policy in place
that's
is-
fine. The
is
rest
to
of the board can
improve the
definitely-
opportunities for
definitely
people
the
to be able
board
to
can,
serve.
can do that. And just like they passed a resolution last year to increase the part of the salary, that was the board. And that's that, and I'm okay with that if the rest of the board feels that way. Again, as long as I'm here, that's all
You're
I
just
feel.
choosing not to take the benefit, Manny, and I get that. I understand where you're coming from. That's just, you know, you're stepping away from it because it's not something you believe in, and I respect your opinion for that. But it doesn't mean, I mean, we're not going to be sitting in these chairs forever. There are going to be others that are going to be sitting here in the future. And if we can create a policy making it creating more opportunities for us as elected officials to participate in these type of events in which we are, you know, engaging with the community and raising people up and recognizing organizations and individuals for the efforts that they put towards our community. I think that's money well spent, and I think it reduces the burden on individual elected officials. So, you know, I would be in favor of such a policy. I'd like to see it drafted up and looked at, and so we can review it further. So,
Will do.
One more, Stuart.
Yes, indeed. Last on here tonight, we have council with us tonight. The topic is listed as discussion of possible zoning change in T District to allow residential schools conferring degrees. As you folks will recall, we previously have discussed the application on behalf of the Cardinal McCluskey School with regard to, at 145 North Highland, with regard to a zoning change, an amendment to the zoning change. What we have received from council, we received it a little while ago, was a supplement to their earlier submission, which goes into some greater detail as to the impact overall with regard to the various T-zones that are throughout the village. I should point out, as you folks I suspect know, that with a proposed zoning change, what this board would do is refer this matter to the planning board. The planning board would then issue a recommendation within 62 days based upon certain criteria that are set forth in the statute. The recommendation would then come back to this board. It would then pass a resolution for a public hearing to determine if in fact the zoning amendment should be approved, and then the board would vote on that amendment. That is ordinarily a majority vote unless there is, I will hasten to say the word, a petition filed by a certain number of homeowners in the area, and then that changes the percentage of the vote. It would actually go up to a 3/4 requirement by law. I know you're looking at me quizzically.
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
What happens
well,
is
it's a
this.
supermajority.
You need a,
Yeah.
if a certain number of property owners, I think it's 20%.
Okay.
Within, and they define the property owners by say either they're adjacent or they're net, whatever. If they file a written petition of objection,
Okay.
that means then that and the petition is approved, it's accepted as by the number, the vote goes from simply a majority to a 3/4. So you'd need, instead of 3 members, you need
Need
4
four,
members.
it's 4/5, okay.
That's what it comes down to.
And the change that's being proposed is to allow for this kind of facility, which is a school
What's being
conferring
allowed, and I can
residential
invite council up if they have any if there's any questions, but what it would be effectively is to make, it would be it's for a residential school that confers degrees, which is not what is currently provided for in the T-zone. Educational facilities are provided as a conditional use within that location, but this would allow it as a residential facility similar to what already exists at 155 North Highland. I have reviewed the ZBA minutes from earlier this year, and the ZBA did refer this and did recommend that the applicant seek a zoning amendment. The view of the ZBA that there was no basis for them to grant a variance for a variety of reasons, and that the appropriate manner for them would be to proceed with a zoning amendment. Council has provided us with the proposed zoning amendment, And as I said, the procedure would be then to refer this to the planning board, allow them to make a recommendation, part of which is it consistent with the comprehensive plan? Does it have anything to, does it have an impact on the area? How would it impact on the other T-zones? Provide their recommendation, and then there would be a public hearing held by this board, which is the one that would make the determination as to whether or not there should be a change to the zone. This is not a map change. It is just an amendment to particular provisions in the code that relate to T-zones and the type of conditional uses that would be allowed within those T-zones. Also a change with regard to some of the bulk requirements that appear within the charts that are at the end of the zoning code. Council's provided submissions both last December. They provided another submission at the end of March detailing this with various maps and explanations. But as I said, the purpose would be to allow it to go to the planning board. And in fact, the code is very clear. All applications for zoning amendments, it says every application must go to the planning board after it's first presented here. So that would basically be the next step. If the board is so inclined, we can have there can be a resolution at next Wednesday's meeting to refer it to the planning board, and I'm advised that the planning board would at least be able to consider it at its next meeting, which I think is May the 23rd. And then, as I said, they have 62 days from the referral to issue their recommendations back. And again, it's recommendations that they issue. They do not make the determination as to the zoning change.
You mentioned that there currently exists in these zones, and as I recall, these zones are actually over 4 neighborhoods. It's mostly 2-family
Right.
zoned. And though it was brought to us because of a particular property that was interested in it, we would be changing the zoning code, and it would impact any potential properties in any of these T-zones.
Within any of those T-zones, that's correct.
Now, currently, it's a conditional use for an educational institution. It is also is it also a conditional use for there's residential senior facilities permitted
Yes.
in this zone
Yes.
as well? Okay,
It's cemeteries, residential, as you say, but it's not residential educational. So that's the difference, because that's what McCluskey is. So that's why that's not provided here.
So absent of it being recognized in the statute, it's not allowed, right? Isn't that what happens if it's absent as a definition?
If it's not considered.
If it's not,
You're correct.
If it's not a correct use or conditional use, then
It's not permitted.
It's
It's
not
empty,
permitted.
that's
I
right.
guess my confusion here is you referenced that the zoning board had made some comments,
Right.
and perhaps you don't have them with you right now,
I
but
do.
well, I'm just curious, their reasoning to not act on it.
Yes.
And I can understand where they felt as though, you can't give a variance for something that's not even defined for a use that's even defined within the land use law. I could see that's one reason why they'd want to.
And I'm happy to go over this, and if I might, we do have the council here who were there as well, but either of them are welcome to come up. Dan, if you want to come up and chat as well.
Actually, the thing is, I understand what this is, but we're familiar with the McCluskey home and their case, and our question now is, do we want to change the law that would then impact everything in the T-zone? Because if it's something that we can apply to all the T-zone, then they would be eligible for it, and it exists because it already existed, and there's an adjacent property they would like to expand on, and they can't unless the law is changed. But if we change the law for here, then we change the law for all the neighborhoods. I'm predisposed to being perfectly fine with changing the law, because I don't think it's going to change anything, because we already have residential care and we already have educational, and this exact thing exists in the community. We haven't had concerns raised from it, and most of these neighborhoods are already built up anyway. So I don't see a lot of reason not to.
Right, and again, that's not effectively before the board tonight anyway, because that would be only after a public hearing would there be a determination
Well,
made.
maybe we can air it out later on. If you could send me the minutes,
John, I'm more than happy to. Just so it's known, there was a whole discussion there about non-conforming use.
Right.
And what occurred was, because most of the building was in fact not being used, the issue before the board was they'd effectively lost their non-conforming use status, so that they would not be able to get a variance because they were no longer using the building as it had been used. Because the petition at that point was the applicant is seeking a change in non-conforming use for a property that is a legal non-conforming use office to a two-family residential district. But I'll send you all the minutes because I have them here. And there's a discussion by the board members as to the need to refer it back for a zoning amendment change.
Objection to
But I'll send it
forward,
through.
at least, I mean, we'll have a public discussion about it.
Yes, there'll be a public hearing after we get the recommendations back. So with the board's okay, we can refer that next week.
But part of what I actually, again, feel uncomfortable on this topic, this particular topic, is because we are going through a process. We do have a study, sort of like a housing study that we are looking at the whole village, sure, for Kevin Dorka. And after that, we have said that we would like to look the village as an overhaul and see what is working and what is not being working. And then we'll look at the comprehensive plan. And this is not for you guys, this is more questions for the board members, where we looked at to change stuff around. So to me, us going through this process of modifying a particular zone for a particular property owner, so to speak, it's not the way I will approach this. I will approach it, let's finish what we have right now going forward with our study. Let's look at the whole village and let's see what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. That's the approach I would like to take. But if the rest of the board again feels that that's not needed, then
I actually
votes. Obviously.
I actually do share your sentiment actually on that, because I was trying to go through my phone trying to look for the housing needs assessment, and I don't want to speak out of turn as far as permitted uses in the T-zone. But if we're going to sit here and amend the T-zone now,
Correct.
there may be something else to amend within the T-zone anyway. So
Exactly.
do we amend the T-zone now, or do we amend it all together for that particular issue, because we are actually going through a housing needs assessment? And there was something in his report that kind of caught my attention.
Council, let me ask you, we may want to make a number of modifications to our zoning regulations after we get this report, and we're going to have a draft of the report in our next work session in 2 weeks, correct? And then we'll have a final next month. So that is not in the far too distant future. Like, we won't even necessarily have heard back the recommendations from the planning board on this particular issue. So does it make sense to go ahead and get the recommendations for the planning board, because they're just going to look at one thing at a time anyway? We
Right.
can't hand them 20 changes we want to make and expect them to come back in 62
No,
days.
we can certainly send it to them for the recommendations, and then at some point, as I said, the public hearing can be scheduled. In terms of timing with Mr. Dworka's report, just so that the board is aware, there's going to be, things are being pushed back slightly, and we're going to get, and the reason for that is, if you remember, there was an extra session on April the 23rd. Because of that, there's a little more data that he gathered. So it's probably, instead of at the end of June with the final report, we're probably looking at July 12th. I will have that information tomorrow for certain. I've been talking to Lynn to try to find out exactly what all the dates are, because there were certain parameters within the contract that were to be met in terms of dates, and that's information that I'm getting, and I will get to you folks. But you are correct, because he will be coming in with something which will look at all the zoning issues. And I think it can, this issue that's before us on this particular topic can certainly go to the planning board, get their recommendations. And then by the time the public hearing is held, at which point you will have had Mr. Dworka's final report, and see where you want to go, then you can make a decision, because you'll have a public hearing, you'll be able to make a determination as to which way to go. I don't think it stops us from referring it to the planning board to at least get their recommendations as to this particular change. Because you're right, ultimately, if there are other changes going to be requested, we have to go to the planning board anyway. It may be that one will ultimately fold into the other, but as to what's here right now, that can certainly be presented to them to at least get their recommendations.
Are people comfortable with moving it to the planning board for a recommendation and seeing what comes back, and we don't have to act on it?
Well, I think the only, it sounds like there's going to be other things that, I mean, based on what Kevin Dwork is going to come back with, they're going to have to consider other things. This is a very specific request about a very specific zone, about a very specific, set of definitions about what's permitted and conditional and stuff like that. So, I'm feeling a little torn right now because, we want to make best use of the planning board's time. And if we have larger, more strategic information from Kevin Dwork's study that could change the ask that we make of the planning board, ultimately, maybe not just for a T-zone, but for any number of different zones that we have, within the village. I'd like to. I honestly want to read the
Sure.
the minutes of the of the ZBA just to understand what's going on there.
I'll
But
send it to everyone. I think that's easy.
I don't know. I'd like to wait another week before. I mean, we can make this decision next week, but I need a little. I'm not ready to commit to sending it to the planning board tonight. I guess that's where I'm at right now.
I'll send it around. I'll send you the minutes. You can see that, and then whatever other documents we have, and we can go from there.
All right.
If I may, Anthony Monteleone,
You need to
Please
come to the microphone, sir.
Anthony Monteleone, we're the attorneys for the property owner. This is the old church property, and it's extremely unique to the T-zone. There is no other property in the T-zone of that size or of that nature. And the changes that we are requesting are specific to the application of that property to the use. There would be no possibility, and we did an analysis of the entire all of the T-zones in the village, where a similar use could be permitted or even feasible. So we're not asking for anything other than the fact that this property be utilized. It's now in the form of an office building. It's totally not feasible for this property to ever be two-family. It's just not feasible. And certainly go look at the property and satisfy your own.
Yeah, I mean, I can appreciate your perspective on this, but in my mind, we have some larger challenges that we have around land use, across the village. And, we finished the comprehensive plan in 2009, and it's time for us to really take a look at what's going on with all of that. And it takes a lot of effort to go through the land use change process. There's public hearings and everything else. And to the extent that we can, kind of put all our eggs in one basket legislatively and from a time perspective, it's going to be a lot more efficient for us to have a broader look at land use, not just for T-zones, but there may be other things we want to do with T-zones. And listen, I understand, your unique situation for that property and the property's use in relationship to the other T-zones. But from my mind, we still need to step back and look at the larger use or the larger issue of land use across the entire village based on this new study that we have. And so I would ask for you to allow us to deliberate and kind of understand a little bit more of that. Not that I'm saying that I'm against making the change that you're requesting. But I don't know if we're going to give it to you in the time zone that you
If you've
want.
had the comprehensive plan since 2009 and you haven't acted on it,
We have acted on it. Oh, we put land use code. We not only did a comprehensive plan, we totally rewrote the code. I'm saying that we haven't. We have been absent in re-looking at the land use code and looking at what changes we need to make. And you're supposed to do that every 10 years. We're kind of behind here, and that's why we hired Kevin, and we had other challenges that we've had here in the village that have led us to the point where we feel like we need to look at land use very seriously. And there's a timing challenge for your situation because your ask is coming at the same time when we're starting to look at a holistic look at land use across the village. So I would ask for your forbearance in the situation. I think we certainly would want to consider your situation.
Well, I appreciate that, but I don't think there's any harm by forwarding it to the planning board for their recommendation. It would just be a recommendation on this, and you can certainly ask them for any other recommendations on any other zones.
We're not properly prepared to ask them all those questions right now. Otherwise, I'd be more comfortable in doing that. I mean, that's the reality. Is we're waiting to get this more information on this housing study so we can ask the proper questions to the planning board, not in just on a single focused land use, but across all the zones. And we would want them to do a much more comprehensive look at land use across the village, because that would be part of the process to make any changes.
What kind of a timetable do you have?
Well, I mean, you heard Councilor Kahan talk about the timetable of hopefully receiving in July. We'd be receiving the final report, and there'll be recommendations that come from that allow us to deliberate on the recommendations that he makes about land use changes we would want to make. So,
and then those would be forwarded to the planning board?
If we all agreed that that's what we wanted to do. I mean, I'm just speaking for myself, but yeah, I mean, it would be my desire to do that and make whatever land use changes we as a board felt would be effective and would best represent, the land use needs of the village.
I would still request that this referral be made, and certainly I understand the fact that you want to do the comprehensive, and maybe they can work out together. July is, we're in May now, and you can then forward those recommendations to the planning board after your July discussions, while this one will be in the works.
But we have to look at things more holistically, and I think
I'm not asking for a single determination on this. I'm just asking that this be pursued now, and then the rest of it, and they all be acted upon simultaneously when you're comfortable.
So, Stuart, can you just explain the process again? If we were to proceed with sending it to the planning board, in 60 days they would come back, and then it would be up to us whether we call for a public hearing or.
Yes, the way, Trustee Bazemore, the way it is under, it's section 27059 of the code. After it's referred, the planning board has 62 days to provide their recommendation within 62 days of the referral. After the referral, and it comes back to the board, then the board would pass a resolution to schedule a public hearing. And provide appropriate notices as required by both the code and by the village law, and then the public hearing would be held, and ultimately a determination would be made. The code does not explicitly say when the public hearing has to be held, but the public hearing comes after the recommendations are received from the planning board. That's.
And this is just basically to make this a conditional use.
This would be you're expanding the definition of conditional use because you're basically from just educational institutions, it would now be a residential educational institution, effectively is what you're doing. So you're expanding the conditional use within a T-zone. That's correct.
Okay.
Keeping in mind, there are already residential uses.
Yeah.
And there are already educational uses. They are just not on the same property at the moment.
So you're just looking for 3 people to say yes right now.
To say yes to send it to the planning board for recommendation. I mean, it's not an actual vote, but I mean, I feel like it's the sense of the board, and the board is not unanimous.
Okay.
I think there's no reason not to send it to the planning board, but it's not because of this particular instance, because I'm not convinced that it couldn't possibly happen someplace else in all of the T-zones, if not today, someday. And we're making a change, we're possibly making a change that would impact 4 different neighborhoods. I'm coming to it from the perspective of the change is a modification that is so minor from what currently exists that it's not going to be a big factor in all of our comprehensive considerations that may come after the Kevin Dworker report. If what we want to do is be responsive to the particular request that brought this to our attention. He seems to have more of a time constraint than we do just generally.
Since that you're there, I'm going to ask you a question, and I'm not in favor of this going to the planning board right now. Like I said previously, I would like to see the whole village as a holistic plan than just a particular one. But if this changes were to go through, the particular property that you're talking about becomes tax exempt, or what is the tax value of that property?
We actually have that, don't we?
The assessed value currently is $1,151,000.
And if it goes, if we make the modification, if the board makes the modification on that T-zone, what does that mean?
Well, it would become educational, and educational through a church, so I may well come off the roll.
Okay.
But under the current conditions, that assessment is totally unrealistic because the only thing that can be built there is a two-family home, one two-family home.
I
And
wasn't
our next
referring
step
to that. I
would
was
be
just referring to the value of the property at this point, and going forward with the change, it means that value, the tax value that.
Well, the property does not have that tax value now. We haven't come in to reduce it because we've been before your board, but the next logical step would be to reduce it, and it would be based on a one two-family home being built on that property. And what's the value of a two-family lot? The house as it built, or the building as it currently exists, is not adaptable to a two-family home. No.
It could be adaptable. It's just the purpose of you being in here is because of the use that they want to do. Your client that wants to use it.
Yes.
If someone comes in and has more money, let's say, and wants to buy that property, he can definitely put that as just a one-family house and be his mansion. You know, it could be a two-family house.
Really, in
So-
that location?
Definitely, why not? There's other places around the village that has a one-family house where it's just a one-family house by itself.
No, that neighborhood, I don't think is conducive to building a $1.5 million one-family home.
Okay.
So.
I would ask
Get a
that you
split
consider
board on this,
referring
looks
it.
like.
Thank
Either
you.
3-2 or 2-3, it's pretty split, it's not unanimous. We think, right? 1, 2.
Where are you?
Well, it doesn't matter, but you didn't want to do it a few minutes ago.
Yeah, so I was.
The way, I'm not sure that we should do stuff like this unless it's not really a vote. It seems like if 2 or 3 people are not comfortable, it's enough to sort of say. I mean, John wants more information. And you want to hold off a week? Is that right,
Yeah.
John? We're going about a week.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
I honestly want to read the minutes from the zoning board.
Sure.
I'm
It's a
still
week.
kind of troubled that they couldn't wrap their head around, making that work. I want to understand the reasoning, and I want to understand what's going on. And I, frankly, based on what Manny and Quantel said earlier, is that, we're going to be looking at all kinds of changes around land use in the village based on Kevin's study. And I don't think we should be looking at things in isolation. I think we should be looking at things much more holistically if we're going to go through that process of looking at land use change. So, I don't want to do this one single thing and then you have to walk it back because maybe we have other considerations around T-zones.
So Stuart's going to send us the ZBA minutes to be able to review.
Absolutely.
My assessment could be entirely wrong after we hear from the planning board. They could say, Victoria, you don't know anything about planning. It has this, and this impact, and we would not recommend it. But we will not know that until we ask the planning board.
I would respectfully ask that you,
We
after
heard,
reading the minutes next week, make a determination as to whether you want to.
we are very familiar with your request now, so thank you.
And I just want to tie that back in. So let's say the board feels comfortable next week, 2 weeks after that, they send it to the planning board. So they're going to be looking at just one particular topic. When Kevin Dorka comes back with some of the recommendations, some of the stuff that may be affecting the T-zone that could be related to this particular change is going to overlap. There's some stuff in there that I would like to see in our T-zones or different, the BW8 zones that we have, the S50s that we have, that could be something else that could be tied. So to me, it's more like we isolated this particular topic, that all the stuff that could be around it may be affecting that same area. That's my
Manny-
biggest
well,
concern.
Manny,
so.
isn't it fair to say that once John gets, because he's the one that requested more information for himself, you seem to have an opinion, but isn't it fair to say that after you give it to the planning and they make a recommendation, you could at that point say, I don't want to go, that we will not go forward with it because at this point we're seeing that it raises other issues. We're not obligated or held to the recommendation of the planning board, correct?
No, it's a
if that's
recommendation.
your discomfort, it will be your discomfort.
It's not just that. It's me looking at all the issues that we're gonna encounter when Kevin Dorka finalizes his.
But that would
process.
be your decision as a trustee on the, of this board. The planning board will be looking at it, I think, in a silo is what you're worried about, right? They're not looking at anything else.
Correct, for this
Okay.
particular issue.
Right, so for this particular issue, after 60 days it comes back to us. If at that time we see that there are other issues, we're going to say, well, the planning board recommended that we go forward. They are looking at a silo, a piece of a puzzle, because that's what we asked them to. That's actually their role. So at this point, that piece is too small, and therefore we thank them for their recommendation, but we will not move forward with this recommendation. I'm only putting a scenario. I'm not being.
That's what I'm asking for.
Because I'm not comfortable, because it upsets all the other pieces. That is what we're supposed to be doing. So I'm not sure, using your argument, why you could argue, they could argue, you wasted our time. Why did you send it to us for an opinion if you knew there was? But you know, when we do studies, we can't hold everything up because it's not fair to all parties concerned. But it is our job to say, now that we have this study, which we didn't have 60 days, you know, it's affecting other things mainly. And the public may come in, by the way, and I don't know what the public will say, but the public may come in, hey, thanks for doing this, but you know what? You're sort of messing around with our whatever. So that could also be an input that comes in. So I don't see a conflict. I do not believe, sir, that tonight you're going to get what you came here for, because Trustee Condon wants more information
Understood.
that he should have, and the board's not unanimous, so that's enough of a reason.
But are we looking for a unanimous decision?
We're not necessarily. I personally would
Because-
like one, but we're not looking for one. We don't have to. I don't think
Because-
this is
Like, I'm, you know, seeing you again. You've been here a couple of times. You gave a great explanation. Like, we don't have to accept the planning board's recommendations. We don't even have to call the public hearing. I mean,
Okay,
that's,
this is all about how can we get all the information and understand this as well as possible. One piece of that is reviewing the ZBA minutes. That's an easy thing to do. The next piece of that would be soliciting input from the planning board, because there's so many things that we have not taken into consideration and that they will look at in a different way, and we will then have more information and then decide, do we call a public hearing? Do we
Right.
hold off because we realize we don't want to, you know, take this into consideration in a silo if it may be relevant to some of the other things, or is it so insignificant that we can just move it forward? I don't know. And that would be the reason to get the information that you requested and to get the information possibly from the planning board. But at least for now, we're just going to have an email
and my
sent out
count
this
is
week.
not going to get the majority. I mean, I'm not going to vote. If John wants to look at it, it's 1 week. It's
Yeah, we
fair
can wait.
request that frankly we should have all asked for it. I think it's a good request.
Yeah.
We'll all have an opportunity, and then we'll decide in a week. I mean, that doesn't mean we're agreeing to do it. I'm just
Understood.
gonna need-
All I ask is a fair opportunity for you to review it. And we would be more than willing to hold off on any vote on any recommendation while you're studying the comprehensive plan review. But we'd just like to know what.
You'd be willing to hold off on any vote that we would
Don't say
take?
Yeah,
We know that you'll continue to be in contact with us, and we're very clear on what you would
Well,
like to see happen.
At some point in time, either the seller will, or the purchaser
Understood.
will be exasperated and walk away,
Understood.
and then, you know, at some point, we're gonna have to come in to have the assessment reduced and have it as a one-family house.
Okay, I think this is taking a tone we don't want it to take.
And we've been trying not to do that. What we're asking for is a reasonable,
Just a point of clarification is, I know Mr. Dworka, he's excellent, he's thorough, and well-spoken, as you know. just,
You
with,
just have to announce who
sorry,
you are.
sorry, Dan Lau with the firm of Cuddy and Fader here on behalf of Cardinal McCloskey. So just was there a preliminary outline or study? I understand the final study is coming out, but was there any preliminary information that we should or could look at?
There was a preliminary information, but it was really just a matter of data collection.
Okay.
It was not it's not in any way a recommendation
Not
of
interpreted.
considerations.
Okay,
Yes.
gotcha.
So,
Okay, no.
It sounds like
understood.
that'll be coming the second week of June.
Wow, really?
No? We were supposed to get a preliminary one in May and then a
Yeah,
final one in
I-
June.
I-
We're getting a preliminary one in July?
No. You're going to get June 8th.
Okay.
I believe you will be getting the draft.
Okay.
That's what we're looking at.
June 8th, there will be a draft.
And we post them.
Great.
Well, I mean, it'll be in a meeting like this, so we don't necessarily post the drafts. No, we didn't. We discussed it, and then we didn't even want it. All right.
Okay. Well,
But-
anyway, thank you very
We'll
much
be
for your
out.
Thank you.
consideration tonight.
All right. Can we get a motion to adjourn for executive session for purposes of personnel relating to a specific person and for real property?
So moved.
Second.
On the board, all in favor?
Aye.
With that, I thank you very much for joining us for another spirited work session here in the Village of Ossining. Please join us next week at the Birdsall Fagan Police Court facility on Spring Street for our legislative session. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.
Don't forget, we're meeting on Wednesday, 6 o'clock.
Yeah,
Nelson City
oh.
Park.
Very good, very good. Sorry, you're right.